now. Okay, so start this. So I'm calling this out of the normal views of Florence. Now, most of you saw my previous one where I took you to different places. So I'm going to take you to some places today that most of you, if you've been to Florence, have probably never been to. And then I'm going to show some images of works that I haven't shown that I consider important. So we're going to begin here. Museo de Storia Naturale di Firenze, or it's also called La Specola, which basically means like the presentation, etc. So it's the Natural History Museum. Now, the interesting thing about the Natural History Museum is it's one of the best natural history museums in Europe, but it's like buried on a side street. And if you didn't know it's there, this is the entrance to it that you see. And the street that it's on, if you continued back to my left, if you're looking at the screen to your left, and then there's a little intersection and an angle street to the right, and you'll end up at the Pitti Palace, which is the Medici's summer palace. So it's all Toronto. It's on the other side of the Arno.
Yep. Goodbye.
What course you have?
So
Florence. Art of Florence.
Lucy,
have any of you been there?
come.
Just out of curiosity, have any of you been there?
Been where?
In the Natural History Museum in Florence?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay. All right. So here I am about to be eaten by an alligator. This is the entrance. That was a big graphic on the entrance to the museum. So one of the things about this museum that I love, if you've ever been to the Peabody Museum at Harvard, the old one, it looks like this inside. It's a museum that dates from the 19th century with incredible collection. If you've been there and know what I'm talking about, you've seen the glass flowers collection, which Harvard owns, which are amazing. But here in La Specola, every room is like this. In these old, beautiful wooden glass showcases with endless examples of various types of animals and insects and etc. So this is in the bird room. Here's just a quick shot of one of the setups. This is more than a diorama. Those are the animals, obviously. And then there are these wonderful dioramas that date to the early 19th century. This was any of you who've been in New York or grew up in New York and have been to the Museum of Natural History in New York and seen some of the amazing dioramas there, the room-sized dioramas. This one we're looking at here is about 6 feet wide, and those squirrels there are life-size. It's the painting and the whole setup that I find amazing. Here's another one, little prairie dogs. And it's the way all this is done with the roots and everything. And of course, everything else is painted except for this foreground. That's the skull of a mastodon, which, and the funny, I could hear your reactions to it. It's massive thing, and it's sitting on this sort of table over in a corner. And to me, it's just interesting the way it was displayed in general, but it's also an amazing object.
Yeah.
This is inside one of the larger bird setups, not the diorama. So they set them up with as if it was a real grassland, etc., or a forest. And here we see it, the base of it. Now, one of the things that I found fascinating was in many of the rooms, there were these magnificent lithographs that date from the some of them are late 18th century, but most of them are from the early 19th century and mid 19th century, when color lithography was first starting to be big, but they're later, probably most of these are later and later in the 19th century. But the detail is incredible. And this is about 20 by 30. It's quite large. Here's another spectacular one, turtles. They're really beautiful things. And then shells. So this is, as you can see, you can see the Latin there, but it's, I believe it's a sea urchin, the interior of a sea urchin. And this particular one is probably about, I would say, maybe 6 inches from top to bottom. Beautiful detail. These are the kind of things, I photograph these things, they end up in my paintings. Here's another spectacular one. It's a magnificent pattern. A snail. Giant squid. And you can see to the left, they had all different size and, different species of them, etc. And this is something I never, it's basically a starfish, but unbelievable starfish.
How large was the squid?
The squid, that squid was probably about 4 feet high. So, it wasn't a monster, but still pretty big.
Thank you. Yep.
This again, this particular starfish you see here from the left to the right in my photograph is probably about 2 feet wide. So it's big. So I can imagine with all those tentacles unfurled, quite large. And this odd starfish. And while these things are not necessarily, unusual in the sense that they don't exist anymore, it's just the collection I find magnificent. And in all the different rooms, there were these drawings that date back, some of them dated back to the 16th century, of animals and various shells and insects, etc., that were in the showcases. Now, the museum, the building the museum is in, also has school situations for classroom situations for schools and colleges to be able to come and study there. The museum itself that we're looking at is on the 3rd floor. You walk up to it, and then it's spread out all the way around like a labyrinth of rooms. On the floor below, there are minerals, etc. I'm not going to be showing any of those. Now, this is the insect room, and this on the right here, that thing that looks like a thorn is actually, I think I have a slide that says what it is. It's this, Insette ospine, in Italian, obviously, the translation is below. South American membricid bugs of the genus Umbonia have a perfect thorn-like appearance. I mean, it's pretty incredible when you look at it. Spiders. And, that big one on the upper left is probably about 6 to 7 inches across. And then the birds, just magnificent. The color, obviously. And while many of these birds I was familiar with, it's just to see them in this kind of arrangement on these magnificent old pedestals. It's beautiful. The color.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Phew.
This one looks like he's about to hop away. Just magnificent color. And then here's an example of one of the works of art that was on the wall. And there were no explanations about these. They were just there, and which I find interesting also. Now, in La Specula is, as I say here, the anatomical wax collection, which is the largest in the world. And this dates back to the late 16th into the 17th, late 17th into the 18th century. And it's the work of one artist, wax, sculptor. And he worked on it. I'm trying to get his, because I always forget his name. Where do I have it? Okay, so Gaetano Giulio Zumbo, who started the whole thing, and he worked on it. He developed the process, worked on it pretty much his whole professional life, and it's an amazing. I have a link here to show you a little bit. Let me take you to this link. So one of the things, and I have photographs of this. So as it says, he was a wax sculptor with an obsession with anatomy and corruption. He was best known for his anatomical models laying in La Specula section of the museum for the Grand Duke of Tuscany, the Medici. And these are models of what everybody, from infants to elderly people who were all affected by the plague. Let me go back to my whoops, here we are. So this is a general scene into the wax museum. Now, the thing about the wax museum is you can't just go there. When you go to the museum and you pay your entry fee, which I think was 10 euros, you have to ask for a separate ticket to the wax museum, and they give you a timed ticket. This is similar to what I discussed last time about that the Michelangelo graffiti in the basement below the Medici tomb that he designed. So if you know about it, just ask. It doesn't cost extra, and I think it may cost extra. But this is just a view of the general area. Now, one of the interesting things about the museum, about the wax things, is it was widely known across Europe in the 17th and in the 18th and 19th centuries. And one of the anecdotes I found was, there are extensive full human figures of men and women, and they were done, it's all wax and done in parts so they could be taken out and used as examples for teaching purposes, so that a physical body did not have to be mutilated, since they were concerned about that. So they created this. And people, in part of my research, it says that, which may or may not make sense, says the gutted female forms were a favorite of the Marquis de Sade, which is interesting in itself. All right, so this is, it says Giornale de Mortale. It's his journal from 1793 when he was working on these. He worked on all of these with commissions from the Medicis in his workshop, and the museum itself wasn't opened till I think it's 1745. Get the exact date. 1775 was the first time it was open to the public. This was all created over 40, 50 years or so by Zumbo, and the process which he invented and was such a genius at, paid for by the Medici for their enjoyment and the enjoyment of royal families and people who would come and visit, but it wasn't open to the public. So I am asking a general question. I'm standing in the room, and you notice on the walls behind me are all of his drawings. He did these very detailed drawings of all the different parts of the anatomy before he started to sculpt them. So here's a close-up of one of those plague pieces. And these are in cases, it's probably about 2 feet wide. This looks almost square. And you see Mother Mary sitting here while all of the horror of the plague exists below her. And again, everything is done in wax. The details here, just incredible, just amazing things, and done in wax. There's a close-up. Look at, you know, the anguish, the everything, all amazingly sculpted. I mean, it's pretty horrible, but documenting that aspect of the plague.
Is the room temperature controlled? I would think they'd have to
Yes.
keep it cool.
Well, I was there, the last time I was there was summer of 2019. It was June. And it wasn't warm by any means, you know. I couldn't really say that it was air conditioned, but it's definitely kept room temperature, or, you know, below room temperature in that regard. Like you said, you can imagine. And I know I spent a fair amount of time there, been there a few times, and you don't see, other than broken pieces, because they're hollow, many of them. I don't remember seeing much that looked like it was melted or in any way affected by weather. There was a flood. There's been a number of floods of the Arno in Florence over the years. So there was a big one in '64. And a number of these large pieces were stored down in the basement of the museum, and it was flooded. But they were able to salvage the wax wasn't affected. The environments that they were on, or the couch, you know, pillows, you'll see in a few minutes that some of the larger figures are laying on had been affected, but they were able to salvage just about everything. So here's a head. And the thing to remember, of course, is that these were done to be used as instructional items. So you didn't have to take a corpse and cut the corpse up. You could look at these and they would be used for medical research, et cetera, but mainly for teaching purposes. But the detail is just, it's outrageous. You look at this and it's so hard to believe you're not looking at the real thing. I know that there's been this I think they're wax, this show of anatomical aspects that I think was in the Science Museum in Boston. It's been traveling around. I don't know if any of you saw that. I did not see it because it didn't interest me as much as something like this does, but it's based on the same principle. Here's the full, go ahead. Yes.
Mark, do you know if these were cast from plaster, or whether they were carved directly? Or...
No, they're carved. They're carved. He would make models of them and drawings of them, and then construct them in parts and then sculpt it.
Wow,
So it wasn't cast, no. But again, look at this, every tiny little vein, it's incredible. And the position from the other side, there are armatures in there to hold things up. The full female figure was not on display because they were repairing something on it. I have pictures of one of the female figures. And then the other thing, of course, is, remember, he's an artist. He's not just doing anatomy here. So the position that he has placed the figure in, as opposed to just having it lying flat, is quite interesting in itself. You know, you don't realize, when you look at this, we don't realize how many veins and, you know, things we have under our skin, which is good, I guess. And you look at something like this and you really get an understanding of a better understanding of human anatomy. Now, the couch below him and the cloth, all of that's all original. So here's one of the female figures, one of the ones that was used for educational purposes. So that is human hair, And you see, so the different organs, et cetera, can be taken out. So here, her chest and lower abdomen are exposed. This is the best I could do with the females when the last time I was there to photograph. All right, now in that same building is the Tribune of Galileo, as it says, for the Third Congress of Italian Scientists in 1841. It's a secular temple dedicated to the memory of Galileo. This is a view of it with frescoes on the ceiling and a statue of Galileo. And his original instruments that he used were originally stored here, but they're now in the Science Museum. All right, this is a photograph from I think it was 1870 something, of the same place that I just showed you my photograph of, done for at the time of that exposition. Little Giotto break. I may have mentioned this to you before, that in Methuen, Dolce Freddo Gelato, which is owned by a good friend of mine, Andrea Rossetti, who's from Trieste, who makes gelato that's just as good, if not better, than any you can get in Italy. And he uses machines that he gets from Italy. That's my plug. All right, now, one of my favorite places in Florence is this particular place, Bizzarri, which the name alone I always thought was bizarre. So what it is, it's, as you see, it was established in 1842, and it's a store that sells herbs and elixirs and perfume oils, and thousands of different kinds. And also, you can get a prescription from an herbalist and go there and get something made for yourself. I don't know, this isn't a link here. So here's my picture from inside. So you go inside and it looks like it hasn't changed since 1842, with all the cabinets and things. And above here, what you see up here is this, the upstairs. Here's the stairs that go up. And there are, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more bottles. And when you come in at the desk here, there's a large book, probably, I don't know, 15, 20 pages, that lists all the different ones they have. And I get perfume oil there. And you go, you can choose different things, and the woman will put a tiny little bit on your wrist or whatever, so you can smell it. But when she fills the bottles, and it's just amazing every time I see her do it, she takes out one of these monster old apothecary bottles or jars, with a glass top, puts a glass tube into it, sucks into the tube to a certain point with her finger over the end, then comes over and takes her finger off and puts it in a little bottle for you. Every time I see her do that, I keep thinking I would probably swallow the stuff, but it's just quite amazing. I have a link. Yes, I do. Okay, here's a link. You can see that's who originally started it, Dr. Alessandro Bizzarri. And this is their website, but I don't know if there are, yes, that's the story. And these are their products. So you can see the different products and what they
Wait a
sell.
minute, I'm not seeing this.
You're not seeing this?
No, I'm seeing the same slide you had before.
That's weird. Did you see the last one that I shared? Oh, you know why?
Yeah, we're still seeing the cabinet.
Yeah, we're seeing the cabinet.
Ah, that's interesting. It shows, let me go here. No, that's not it. All right, let me stop share. Let me go back. Share screen. Share. Okay, now you see it, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so you can see what let me go back to the top here. So the home page where I started, and then I clicked on, so these are their products. And they have, you see aromas, which we would call perfume oils, etc., herbs, extract, essential oils, foodstuffs, chemical products, etc. And so here's an example, aromas, and then herbs, endless, and extracts. And and these are pure oils, extracts, essential oils. I mean, you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. They have endless products here. It's just a magnificent place. Okay, now if I stop share and go back here, all right. But you're not seeing this. Let me. Share. Okay, let's go back to here where we were. Share. And all right. Now we're moving into a different area. I want to show you some. These are objects from different places in Florence. But first, so this is an example of they create these objects for specific situations. So this was in, where was this? In the orphanage where I think we were there a little bit the last time I was there. And these little tableaux are created for a specific event or a specific saint, etc. I think this is the only one of those. But now what I want to show you are reliquaries. Now, I may have talked about reliquaries before, but any church that you go into in Italy and in other parts of Europe will have reliquaries inside, where they have the relics of a saint, usually, or someone significant. It's almost always a saint. And some of them are quite elaborate, like this particular one that you're looking at is, it's the Reliquario de San Sebastiano. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is the Reliquario della Flagione. This is from the 1600s. It doesn't have a exact date. The Flagiones, or the Flagellists, were a group of monks who would flagellate themselves, whip themselves on the back. They wore, they wore rough Cossacks, and they would go around in the different cities and towns flagellating themselves because they had to feel the pain that Christ felt, and that was the way they worshipped him. So this is one for them. And one of the things about these reliquaries that I have always found interesting is, and I've seen hundreds of them, and they'll have, some of them have the skull, but the skull is more unusual. They'll have the arm bone or the finger or a part of the back, etc., from Saint so-and-so. And I've always felt that if they ever put them together, there'd be too many. Because who knows? The strangest one I ever saw, and I wasn't able to take a picture of it, was in Padua, the wedding ring of the Virgin Mary. It was a tiny little ivory wedding ring, and it said it was the wedding ring of the Virgin Mary, but how can we prove that? I have no idea. All right, so here's another one. This is San Sebastiano. And up here, you can see that there's a bone in there. And the thing about these is it became an industry in itself. There were artisans who just made reliquaries. That's all they made. And some of these are really over the top. Here's another one. And you can see up here, there's a tiny little bone in there. This one is San Ambrogio. There's an even more elaborate one, and we can't even see where the relic is. It's, it's in here. There's a tiny little window. This is Santa Marico, And the artists who made these are not always shown. Here's some strange guy in the street with an Alfa Romeo. All right, now, the last time I was there, summer of 2019, there was a large show dealing with the works of a number of artists who I love, and this is not Pomodoro. I just forgot his name, but this is called The Visitation, and the painting is quite spectacular, as you can see. And one of the things that was interesting was in the show was his preliminary drawing for the painting, which is unusual to find. That was found later on, found in the 20th century. And the interesting thing about it, of course, for me, is the grid. This was done the same year. This was, let me find the exact date of it. So this was Pontormo, which I think I forgot to mention. So he did the painting 1528 to 1529, and the preliminary drawing was also done the same time. So when I do a large painting, I do a drawing, or if I'm working from a photograph, and I grid it up, put the grid on my canvas, that's the same dimensions as the drawing, and then transfer. So it's an ancient process. So if he was doing this, what you see in this particular square, the lines, etc., would go on the square on the canvas, etc. And it's unusual to actually see a preparatory drawing, especially one by Pontormo, but still unusual to see it. Now, in that same show, Pontormo, if you've ever studied art history, you may have seen this painting. So Pontormo was what you might call the court painter for the Medicis at this time. And there are endless paintings of the family. And a lot of times when he's doing, I think I may have mentioned this if you saw my last lecture, the large Pontormo mural in San Lorenzo, there's a young girl in it that I pointed out was actually Caterina de' Medici, because he would put her or the other kids into his paintings. But what you're looking at here is, so this is, we saw the study for the Visitation. So this is, it's called Retrato de un giovane, the portrait of a young man. That's basically what it's called. And it's believed to be Carlo Nerone, who was a young, wealthy man. But the interesting thing about this is, so the painting is done, as I said, 1529, 1530. So in 1527, there was which, for want of a better term, revolution in Florence, and the Medici were forced out. And the Medici ended up allying with the French, who helped them get back control. That was the time, as I mentioned the last time, when Michelangelo was building the Nuovo Capelle for the Medicis, and that's when he was down in the basement drawing on the walls because there was all this stuff going out on the streets, same time period. So speculation about this particular painting has to also do with the fact that he's wearing black. And if you were a supporter of the people to get control, you wore black. If you were a wealthy person in this sense, but also because his name is Nerone, which basically translates to black, we don't know for sure whether Pontormo was being, sort of making a pun on it, or whether he was actually dressed that way when he did the painting. The pose that he's in is very typical of those kind of the poses of done of portraits at that time. You notice it's not full face, his hand is on his hip, he's turned, he's got what could be a paper or part of a book in his hand, implying that he's educated. Here's another one, same pose. And this particular one is Retario Dion Albardiere. The thing he's holding in his hand is a bandolero, a pike, like used in battle. Though he looks like he's probably 15 or 16 and not particularly the kind of person that would be out fighting, and he's also not wearing black, you notice. So that is also possibly making a statement, but it may have absolutely nothing to do with it. Those are the kind of things we don't know. Now, we're now moving to another place, and we're now in the Sala Capitolare in the Santa Felicita Church. You remember that little tiny church that I brought you to last time that has the magnificent Pontormo painting in it that's set back from the street that you wouldn't know it's there. Well, at the side of that church, inside the church, there's this small chapel. This is the inside of it, which in 1810, was it? I'm trying to think exactly, 1812. Napoleon took over Florence. And I mentioned last time that there are rooms in the Pitti Palace where he never actually lived, but he had some things decorated. And one of the things he did was he closed all the churches and the monasteries when he took over. And this particular room in Santa Felicita was closed and wasn't really open to the public for almost 100 years. I mean, obviously it wasn't sealed off, but people weren't allowed into it. And it was built in the early 15th century. And it's pretty much as it was. It's incredible. And what happens now is they have concerts in there. I was lucky enough to see and hear a concert in there when I was there in 2019. And it was, there were two singers, a harpsichordist, and a violinist. And they were playing music from the 15th century and the 16th century and singing. It was incredible. The acoustics in this room are magnificent. And as you can see, the frescoes on the walls. So what you see here is a period harpsichord that the musician was playing on. This is another, had been repaired. The frescoes had been damaged. These are reliquaries in like the ones I showed you a little while ago. I think I have a close-up of them, yes. But they've been, the relics that were inside of them, as you can see, were removed and damaged. I don't know why, and I don't know whose relics were in there, but that's another example of how extensive these things can be. This is the ceiling, which is spectacular. That's all frescoed. And you can see the ribbing and the coffers of the ceiling. The sound in there, I can't even begin to explain how magnificent the sound was. They didn't need very much acoustic help, microphones, etc. They had microphones, but it wasn't turned up very high. The sound was just amazing. And the frescoes were done by a disciple of Giotto. And when you look at a close-up, I know I've shown you some Giotto. If you're familiar with Giotto at all, the facial features, everything is very reminiscent of the kind of work that Giotto did. So the room is just an incredible room. It's definitely one of my favorite places to go. And the frescoes are by Niccolo di Pietro Garrone, who, as I said, was a student of Giotto's. It's another view. That's the harpsichord. And this is the statue of Christ back here is cartapesta, which is paper mache. There was and still is not as extensive a school of of artists who worked in cartapesta, mostly in the south of Italy. And they would make these figures like this bust, but they would make life-size figures that are used in festivals. You can go to Italy any time of the year, in certain cities and towns, there's a festival for the patron saint of that particular town, et cetera. And they bring out these magnificent cartapesta paper mache sculptures. There is a cartapesta museum in Milano that I've been to, and I just need to find all my photographs of it. And it's a very large museum that just has these life-size figures, all done in paper mache, done for these various festivals over, they date back to the 16th century. Just magnificent things. This is a detail of out in the hall going into the chapel that we were just in. This would have held a torch or something like that. Now it has a light bulb in it, as you can see. But the extensive idea that everything needs to be beautiful is something that I love. Okay. Now we're going to go to very quickly. This is Officina Profumo Farmaceutica de Santa Maria Novella. So Santa Maria Novella is one of the most important churches in Florence. It's near the main train station. And on a side street is this particular perfume farm. It's basically a pharmacy, but it's an incredible pharmacy. Okay. This is what's on the wall. Is this, okay, I'm going to take you to another link, which means I'll probably have to stop the share and share my screen again. Because do you guys see this?
Non dimenticherò mai la prima volta in Santa Maria Novella.
All right, you don't see this, right?
See like a sign?
Yeah, wait, I'm trying to stop this so it, all right. All right, what I'm going to show, I'm going to stop. I'm going to share my screen again with that. I thought it would just do it automatically, but I guess it doesn't. Okay, so this is a short little video about it that I think you would be interested in.
Non dimenticherò mai la prima volta in Santa Maria Novella. 60 anni fa. Qui rapito dai profumi, un mondo a me sconosciuto. Un'azienda storica e come un museo, ma vivente. Con i grandi restauri del 2012 abbiamo restituito all'officina il suo antico splendore.
So they restored the whole building back to the way it was in the 16th century.
I macchinari dell'officina erano pronti per essere restaurati e tornare a produrre. Tradizione e innovazione sono le stelle che ci hanno guidato in questi ultimi 30 anni. L'officina ha tutti gli strumenti per affrontare il futuro, ma dovrà farlo coltivando sempre il legame con le sue radici.
This is the way you walk in off the street, you walk in this way. Okay. I just thought that it would be interesting for you to see that. Let me go back to my lecture here. Okay. All right. So this was, and then I have, that's their logo in glass tiles. This is one of the original cases, and you can see the vials of various things in there. And you can buy vitamins and minerals and all sorts of elixirs and things that they make that are all based on the original formulas. And it's not inexpensive, but it's quite an experience to go in there. And again, it's one of those things that if you didn't know it was there, it's on a side street behind the church of Santa Maria Novella. Okay, now we're going to move back to the Uffizi, to some things that I find unusual and interesting that you may not have seen. Okay, so this is it's from a set of panels. So they would have been on the door of a cabinet or on the door of an altarpiece. And this is by Niccolo de Pietro. It's from 1415, 1420. And it's showing, excuse me, Saint Benedict mending a sieve. So this is Saint Benedict over here, and he's got a sieve in his hand that he's mending. And apparently it's quite miraculous that he's mending the sieve, which is interesting in itself. But the architecture of the setting is quite interesting. And there's gold leaf up here. Here we see, so this is Lippi, one of my favorite artists, Filippo Lippi. And it's from 1463. It's Adoration of the Christ Child. And this particular painting was commissioned by Piero de' Medici. Remember that the Uffizi had been Uffizi, which means office. It had been the offices of the Medici, and they started putting their collection there. And the original collection, of course, was all either commissioned by or purchased by the Medici. One of my most favorite works. This is by Domenico di Bartolomeo. And one of the things about a lot of these Italian artists is the name that we know them by was not their birth name. It's a name either they took from the town they lived in or it was given to them, etc. Because Bartolomeo, as he's known, his actual name is Domenico Veneziano, because he was from Venice, which was interesting. So this is 1445, 1447. It's Madonna and Child with a few saints. One of the really interesting things about this painting is you see the band of light that's coming from up here down across the top of Mary. And the foreshortening, perspective on the floor, everything. It's the perspective is, he really has a complete understanding of perspective here. And this is very early on, this is mid 15th century. Here's, you might recognize who that is. It's Botticelli. But this is, the interesting thing about this one is it's probably one of, if not his first independent works. By that, I mean work that he did on his own, not for his master, whose workshop he was in, which in this case was Lippi. But you can see the relationship to Lippi. I mentioned this the last time I talked to most of you about the facial features and positions that are very Lippi-esque that we can see in Botticelli's work. But you can see his genius here, of course, because this being the first painting that he did on his own without prompts from his master. This is Roger van der Weyden, the Flemish painter who creates these magnificent scenes, etc. This is a deposition from the sepulcher, from the tomb, as you can see behind Christ, and they're standing on the opening of it, etc. And van der Weyden is really known for the expressionist aspect of his work, the emotions that come through in his paintings and the people, everything. And then if you look at what's happening in the scene, here it crosses on the hillside behind them and other aspects. But of course, what you see here is not, you know, the biblical time. This is the landscape of Renaissance Florence. And that was very typical. An artist would create a biblical scene like this, an emotional biblical scene, but place it in an environment that the people looking at it would be able to relate to, which is interesting in itself. So this is a Bellini, and it's Giovanni Bellini, painted sometime between 1490, 1510, and it's called Portrait of a Young Man. It's a small piece. It's only about maybe 11 by 14 approximately. That's oil on panel. But down here on the bottom, it says Johannes Bellinus, which is his name. And for probably 100 or more years, people thought it was a self-portrait. But upon further investigation by art historians, they discovered that this bottom panel where the name is painted was done probably 150 years after the painting was painted. So somebody put that there as a way of saying it is by Bellini, but we have enough sketches and examples of what Bellini actually looked like to assume anyway that this was not Bellini. Another interesting piece in relation to the panels. So this is Bartolomeo again. However, many times when we look at works by artists, we might see their name, and then another time we see it, it says Fra. So this is Fra Bartolomeo. The painting we saw before was done before he actually became a monk and took on the title of Fra. It's the same thing with Fra Angelico is another example of that. We can see works of his before he was doing what he was doing and known. But anyway, what you see there, so this was originally the doors to a tabernacle. A tabernacle is like that piece I showed you a little while ago, the one that I said was a small tableau. A tabernacle is an enclosed space that has some kind of statue, etc., inside of it. And there are tabernacles, there are massive tabernacles on the streets behind glass panels. But this was one that would have been sitting on an altar. So it's not that large. It's about maybe 2 feet high. And what you see are the left and right panels of it. And it's the adoration of the Christ child and presentation at the temple. And what had been in there, if it still existed, was a statue by Donatello of Christ, though we don't know where that is, or at least I don't know where that is. The Uffizi displays these and explains what they are, what they were from, but there's no indication of where the original statue was. So in the, I wish I had a picture of that statue, but here's another. And so one of the things about a lot of these paintings, say from Hieronymus Bosch on, and this is by Piero di Cosimo, who was a painter as well. It's Perseus freeing Andromeda. And the surrealist aspect of this is one of the things that I find so interesting. Yet it has all sorts of qualities of the period. And then, of course, there's, you know, this incredible serpent or whatever it is, you know. So here we see, so this is a tondo, and remember tondo, which means round. This is by Ghirlandaio, and it's Adoration of the Magi, a very typical scene. This is 1487. And here's Andrea Mantegna. So Mantegna, you may or may not be familiar with Mantegna, who was one of the most prominent artists who understood anatomy and foreshortening. This is a piece done, when is this? 1480, 1488, 1490, which is around a little before, around the time that he did his most famous painting, which is this, which you may have seen, which is called Lamentation over the Dead Christ. When I teach, and I'm not the only one, I was taught this when I was learning anatomy and drawing as an undergraduate, and we were learning foreshortening. This is the painting that almost always is shown, because we're seeing Christ from his feet back down towards his head, as if we're standing here looking, and the figure is foreshortened. So even though it looks odd, it's actually correct in perspective, but unusual in the scene. And this was Mantegna's sort of masterpiece at the time, that he really made a reputation with this particular painting. And this is Lorenzo Costa's Saint Sebastian. And if you're familiar with the story of Saint Sebastian, this was in Sicily, and the invaders were trying to take over, and so they killed him, or they tried to kill him by shooting arrows, and they couldn't, and they eventually had to cut his head off. I mean, all that stuff is kind of disgusting in itself, but most of the paintings of Saint Sebastian don't show him as a very young man like this. And usually, I mean, he's always tied to a tree, and he always is in agony with endless arrows in him. This one, as you can see, he's got 2 arrows in him. He's obviously very young, and he certainly doesn't look like he's hurt or upset by any of what's happened to him. So it's an interesting take on it. So this is Judas with the Head of Holofernes. This is by Cristoforo Lore from 1610. And I think I've shown you, or eventually if I do more of these, I will show you the works of this particular scene of Judith with the Head of Holofernes by other artists. And the interesting thing about this one, of course, is this is after the head had been cut off, and the detail of her and her handmaiden who's looking at her as if, well, what did you do? You know, the expression on her face is not shock. She's just sort of presenting the head of Holofernes here. An interesting take on it. And many artists did a version of this. So this is by, I must have jumped because there's other things. Well, it doesn't matter. This is, wait, excuse
Thank you,
me.
Mark.
I need to see something here.
Thank you, Mark. I'm taking off.
Oh, okay.
This is really fascinating.
Well,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. I guess I didn't. So this is, here we are. Well, we're still here. Okay. From the current slide. Yeah. So this is Carlo Dolci's Santa Rosa. It's from the mid-17th century, but I thought I had another Lippi in there, which I don't see at the moment. Again, it's unusual. One of the things about Dolci was all he painted were saints. It's all he painted. And if you do, some Google searches for Dolci, this is what you'll come to. You won't come to this particular painting, you may, but endless examples of saints in these kind of looking adoringly up at the sky, up at God, and painted in the same manner. And he focused on that. And if you wanted a portrait of a saint, you went to Dolce, and he was painting. This is mannerism, 16th century. Just want to go back a second because I thought there was another painting here, but I guess I didn't include it. Okay. No, I didn't. All right. So, all right, that's the main aspects of what I had prepared. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the wax collection and stuff. But questions from you at the moment, many of you? No questions? No. So yes.
So when you
Pilar,
say
you're muted, Pilar.
I'm muted,
You have to unmute.
No, I said, go ahead, go ahead.
I unmuted you, Pilar.
Yeah, no, I unmuted myself. I was waiting to see if Pam wanted to say something because I didn't want to cut her off.
Oh, I didn't see. I'm sorry, Pam.
I just had a quick question on fra. Does fra mean
It
Bye.
basically means it's like father.
so
Right.
it's like the group that
Well,
followed?
no, it implies that the artist is a monk or a priest. So that's what. So Fra
Okay.
Bartolomeo was a monk. Fra
Oh.
Angelico was a monk. But many times, and both of them are examples of that. When they begin their career, as it were, as an artist, they are not yet ordained. So you'll see examples of their works where it says that it's by Bartolomeo or it's by Fra Bartolomeo. So the difference being that the one painting might have been done before he was ordained and one was done after he was ordained. It's an honor to be called that.
Huh.
It's
Okay.
like it endlessly bothers me that I'll have students from 20 years ago that still call me professor. I don't want to be called professor. It's that kind of thing. The Fra aspect, and I'm not putting myself in any way on the same, level of somebody like Fra Bartolomeo, but that's why you occasionally see it, and sometimes you don't see it.
Okay, thanks.
So Pilar, you had a
Yeah,
question?
no, my question was, I was curious as to how you discover some. These are really off the beaten path, some of these things. And you said in one case, well, you have to go behind the church and then you'll go down this little alley or whatever.
Right.
How did you discover these things? I mean, it's just people told you about them, or did you happen across?
Friends of mine who live in Florence told me about them. Yeah. I mean, when I first went to Florence in '97 on sabbatical to study fresco painting, it turned out, and I didn't know this, that the school had me one-on-one with my instructor, who is Maurizio Bentiventi, who is now one of my best friends. I mean, Maurizio and I became friends very quickly. He now lives in Berlin, and Maurizio, he came from Sicily, but he studied at the Accademia in Florence. That's where he got his undergraduate and his graduate degree, and studied there and lived there and taught there. We would spend evenings or afternoons or weekends, whatever. He would say, I want to take you to someplace. And he would take me to these places. And that's what's so wonderful about it. And that's the kind of thing I like to share, obviously, when I can. When I take students to Florence, I take them to places like that. Sure, we go to the Uffizi and we go to the Duomo and we go to the Accademia and go to all those places, but these kind of places to me are far more interesting. And the Natural History Museum is a good example because it's a very well-known place, but you have to know it's there. And then, of course, you have to find it because it really is off the beaten path. And, the example of the Michelangelo room, in the basement, in the cellar under the Capelle. A friend of mine who is an art restorer who had spent lots of time in Florence told me the very first time I was going to Florence, he said, "Oh, do this." I wouldn't have known that. The Wax Museum. If you go online, and search for the Natural History Museum in Florence, it'll tell you that the Wax Museum is there. But of course, you have to know to go look for the museum in the first place, because it's not well advertised. And personally, I think it's a good thing that it's not well advertised, because then I've been there 3 times, never, ever been crowded. Now, if you noticed in some of my photographs, when I was in there with you just recently, you could see a couple of people there. There were 6 people, counting myself, who were on that particular tour. And the only time I've been through Vasari's corridor, there were 4 of us. So if you know about those things and can, make a reservation in advance or whatever, or call up if you're in there, it's that much easier to see it. The thing about the Uffizi and the things I've shown you so far is, if you've been there to the Uffizi, you know how vast it is.
Yeah.
And every time I go, there are some salons that are open and some that aren't open. Because either it's just too much, they don't have enough guards to watch everything, or things are being restored, etc. So it's always that way. And so every time I go, there's something, oh, I haven't seen that. Or there's something that I'm able to see. For me, like I remember the very first time I was in Paris, and I spent 3 whole days in the Louvre. I got there when it opened and I stayed till 5 o'clock at night, because, if you've been there, and this was before they built the pyramid the first time I was there, if you've been there, no matter where you go in, there's signs that say this way to the Mona Lisa and this way to the Venus de Milo, and that's it, and most people go to the main galleries and see the important stuff or the things they think are important, and that's it. But if you go downstairs, there are endless galleries with 20-foot ceilings full of paintings, etc. So that's the kind of stuff I like to do. So the things I share with you are those kind of things that we wouldn't normally see. I mean, I included a little bit about Bizzarri and the Pharmacia, because those are unusual places. And places, again, if you look in guidebooks and look deeply in a guidebook, you'll find those things. But, as you all know, most people who travel to places like Florence or Rome or something, they're there for 3 or 4 days and they're on a tour, or maybe they're only there for a day and then they move on to someplace else. So the only places you get to see, if you see anything, is, the Accademia or the Uffizi, or, etc. So that's, of course, the advantage of being able to spend time in a place when you travel. So other questions or comments or from any of you? Yes.
Led me to a second question that I had,
Yeah.
which was, how long did you spend in these places? I mean, I take it, if you go into like, the herb shop or something, you spend some time and but how long did you spend, or were you able to spend? How large is, for example, the Natural History Museum? How long did it take you to go through it and actually see
Okay,
it?
I probably was there for about 4 hours.
Okay.
When you go into the wax part, you can't stand forever.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a number of times when the guide would call back to me to come join the group because I was busy looking at something or photographing something. That happens a lot. So we were only allowed, I think we were only in there for maybe about, I've been there 3 times, but maybe only 45 minutes. They have timed thing, and then there might be another group of people wait. It depends on when you go and what time in the morning or, whatever that you go. But the rest of the museum, you could stand there as long as you want. There's no limit. And especially the first time I go to a place, I try to, I say, okay, what am I doing today? I'm going to go here and stay as long as I can. And the building that the Natural History Museum is in, as I said, it also has, the, the Galileo stuff. And then there's a whole floor of minerals and precious stones and incredible stuff. And then there's an area where they used to teach science with all these old instruments in cabinets that no one has dusted in probably 40 or 50 years. And the back of the museum itself sits adjacent to the Bobley Gardens. And there is an entrance to the gardens and to the museum. You can, from the museum, you could go into the garden, but you can't because you have to pay to go into the garden. But from the garden, you can go into the museum. And again, if you spend time, so you could spend more than a whole day in the Pitti Palace. It's massive. But then if you want to go to the gardens and the Bobley Gardens and the French building, et cetera, in the back, the French school, that's another whole day. So it takes time. When I first was there studying, and I'm a Tai Chi practitioner, and I would go to the Bobley Gardens early in the morning and do my form when there's nobody there, and you're allowed in. You were allowed in. I don't know now you have to pay to get in, but in those, back in the 90s, I would just go walk there and go into the gardens and do my form, and there was never anybody there. It was beautiful. You have to pay to get into it now, but there's so much to see. That's the important thing about all of this, as you mentioned, Pilar, is that if you're going to go to a place, try to spend as much time there as you can and investigate, ask people, what should I see? What's unusual? That kind of stuff. Any other observations or questions?
Yeah. What the name of that place is Dolce Fredo Gelato?
Yeah, it's in Methuen. It's on 110 in Methuen.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it. And just as an aside, you may or may not know that gelato doesn't have as much butterfat in it as ice cream does, and the flavor is incredible. That's my little ad there. He also has sorbet, some, interesting flavors as well. And espresso, can't go there without having, at least I can't go there without having an espresso.
Oh, but the gelato is incredible, and they serve it in these little containers where you can get like a little, a scoop of each different type that you want. You can get like 8 or 16.
I think you can get 8, right? They have it. There's an 8 and there's a 16, but you could also get 1 scoop or 2.
You could, but,
you could, exactly. I have in my freezer right now one of those 8 scoop things. Yeah.
But they don't have sugar-free, I'm afraid, right?
No, they do.
Oh,
He either has one usually, or if you ask, he can make it. He will do that. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah. So, and that's just a little, I go in there and I feel like I'm in Italy. So, which I wish I was. I'm hoping again, eventually we'll all be able to travel again. Sometime
back to
soon.
the vaccines.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, keep your certificate.
Yes.
You'll need it to travel.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So the science, the Natural History Museum that I focused a little bit on today, is a really good example of one of those magnificent places that is out of the way. There are lots of other places that I've been to that are out of the way there that if I do another one of these, I will focus on. But one of the advantages, of course, of spending a lot of time in a place is you get to find these things. That's the advantage, and it doesn't always happen. So,
But you've been to many of them more than once. You've been to many of them, time and again as well, right? Okay.
yes. And that's me. Because I'm usually, I haven't been in Florence since June of 2019, because we can't go anywhere. Usually I'm in Florence at least once a year. I love it. If I was taking students there, which I'm not doing now, or I won't be doing, that's one reason to be there. But mainly I just like to go and be there. And when I'm there, I'll go to places I've been before. But for instance, one of the places that I discovered the last time I was there that I haven't spoken about yet is there's a museum, an armament museum, which is about a 25-minute walk from the center of Florence. So it's another example of a place that most people would never go to if you like that sort of thing. And it's a very interesting, it was one wealthy person's collection, but it's an incredible collection. It goes back to ancient China, and he's got some incredible samurai weapons and armor, and the incredible samurai armor, as well as typical European armor and armaments and that kind of stuff. But the building it's in is a 17th century building with incredible hand-painted tiles and frescoes and, etc. Again, when you go to these places, not only you're going to see all this incredible art, but you're also in a building that's, 500, 600, 700 years old, which to me adds to the experience. Just looking at the ceiling of the room you're in sometimes can be more exciting than the stuff that's on the walls. That chapel in Santa Felicita that we were in briefly is an example of that. Now that I was in for the very first time in summer of 2019. I went 3 times when I was there, but that was the first time I didn't even know it was there.
Yeah.
I happened to see that there was a concert. I saw a flyer. And I was thinking, oh, there's a concert in the church. And so you had to go online to get tickets, and I got tickets. And I went with 2 of my friends who lived there and who one of them was born in Florence, the other one, who she's married to an American, and they live there and live in California. And neither of them had ever been in there. And she's born in Florence. So we didn't know, I thought we were going to the church. And when we got there, they directed us down the side passageway and into this incredible room. And, all I wanted to do was just stand there and look at everything in the room. So we got there a little early before the concerts, before the performers came, and I was able to take pictures, and then they performed. And actually, I became friends with one of the performers, and we communicate on Instagram. But it's that kind of experience, and of course, as you all know, that's the joy of travel. You get a chance to experience those kind of things that you would never normally experience when you're in a tour or with a group or whatever, unless you're there independently for a period of time. But one of the things I would love to eventually do is take a group of, like take a group of people to Florence and show you all this stuff. Maybe, someday. Right. Especially once we're all able to move again. Yeah. So, any other questions, or do you have any, I hope to be doing these again. Is there anything that any of you would like to see that you haven't or would like to see again? Pam?
In the the name just left me.
Yeah.
The big church in
Florence?
in Florence.
The Duomo.
The
yeah,
Duomo, yeah.
The Duomo.
The Duomo Museum. There's something. It's like a big chest, and it was done by 3 generations of artists. And it has all these biblical scenes on it. I mean,
I think I know what you mean.
fascinating. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to look and see if I have a picture of it. The thing about that, the Opera del Duomo is what you're talking about.
Okay.
That's the museum that's there now. Just opened about 5 years ago. It's relatively new. I mean, there was always a museum there, but they redesigned the whole thing. That's when they found. You remember the last time I spoke to you? That's where they found that scale model dome with the brick pattern that that we figured was used as a model, you know, that they never knew was there until they excavated the former garage to build the museum, and they found that there. So, you know, Brunelleschi had obviously made a sample to show the masons how to lay the bricks, and they didn't know that existed. So that I don't know if were you ever there and saw that, Pam?
Trying to think of how many years ago it was that we were there. Whether it would have been the new one. I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, then it was probably the old one. I mean, the new one is much, it's modern, it's very well lit and everything. The old one was not like that. I mean, it was well lit and everything, but it wasn't as extensive. Because they built it, it's behind the Duomo. It was always behind the Duomo, but now it's much larger than it was because they excavated that other area where there had been a garage, a parking garage, where they found that model dome, etc. So, but you know, there are walking around. Not only do you find things like what I've been talking about, but you also find fabulous restaurants that you never knew existed. You know, these tiny little places or little cafes, or you know, that happens to me all the time. Oh, gee, this looks good, you know. And of course, once you get out of the central tourist area, the prices are much less too. You know, you can, you know, an espresso in a cafe behind the Duomo will cost you €1 or maybe even €1.10. Walk 3 blocks away and it's 50 cents, you know, half €1 for the same espresso, you know. Yeah, I mean, that's not unusual in itself. You know, one of my favorite things to do in Florence is go to aperitivo, you know, which is like what we would call happy hour, which is usually between around 5 and 7. Of course, you know, restaurants don't really open till 7:30 or so for dinner. Everybody's out, you know, doing their walk. And so for, depending on where you are, if you are in the central area of the city near the Duomo and all the other sites, and you go to an aperitivo there, it could cost you €8. You get one drink and there's a buffet. But my favorite places, my 2 favorite places for aperitivo, one is Alto Arno and another one is over way out of the near, not that far, maybe 20-minute walk from the center, where for €5 you get the same drink and the buffet is far more extensive. I mean, you can eat dinner. Like I would take students there a lot. Get one drink and eat dinner, and it costs you €5. So you may end up getting another glass of wine or whatever, you know, or you know, a spritz, which would be the thing to drink. But it's things like that, you know. And all of you have traveled, and you all are aware of this kind of thing. So that's one of the joys of spending enough time in a place so you can explore like that. That's the advantage of it, obviously.
You know what else I
Okay,
was
so,
interested
yes.
in is, you mentioned briefly when we were talking about things, the Louvre. And I was wondering, because I love what you do, the Barcelona and, you know, Florence is one of my favorite cities anyways. But do you have places in Paris or France, for example, that you could do a presentation of? Because that would be very cool too. There I haven't been, so I'm curious.
Yeah, I could. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I haven't been in Paris since 2006, but I do have lots of photographs of it. I just have to find them. But I also know a fair amount about that I could talk about. I mean, I was thinking also about other areas. I mean, I've been to Thailand and you know, a lot of Buddhist monasteries there and other places. And I mean, the other one I'm going to do this time is an overview of the female form in art from you know, up to the beginning, the early part of the 20th century, from 17th to 20th century.
Also,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, Let
Yes.
me ask a question. I see that you're able to take photographs in all these museums. I doubt that they would allow that in the Louvre. Am I correct?
No, I've taken photographs in the Louvre. The thing about taking photographs in museums is you can't use a flash.
Uh-huh.
And I don't have to tell you, if you've traveled, how many people just take pictures with a flash. They don't even think about it. And you can get kicked out of museums eventually if you're seen doing that. Some museums will have a sign saying you can't take a picture of X, certain thing. Like, for instance, when I was in Berlin, and there's an example of one in relation to what you said, Pilar, that I could do, because a number of places that I've been in Berlin and in Germany. You may be familiar from art history of the head of Nefertiti, the very famous one. That's in the one of the large museums in Berlin, and you weren't allowed to take pictures of it because they want you to buy their pictures of it. They were very diligent in Berlin about making sure people didn't use a flash. I mean, I've done it enough times. I make sure that I don't have the flash turned on. But usually I've had no trouble taking pictures, Alan.
In St. Petersburg, I recall you had to pay a fee, and then they would let you take photos if you bought a ticket to take pictures.
Oh, well, okay. I mean, that's
funny.
quiet. That makes sense, yeah.
But when did you go to St. Petersburg? Because I was there in 98, I want to say, and I had no problem taking pictures there when I was there.
It was, I'm guessing around 2000, but I'm not 100% sure exactly when.